Yes, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The time that John will find my presentation, so it will be the shortest presentation of the day. I basically have only 5 slides. So my name again is Didier Guynet, so French name. I work for the Asian Development Bank, and more particularly, I work from on the procurement department. It does not mean that the ADB does conduct procurement. We leave it for borrowers, but we do have what we call fiduciary oversight, meaning that we control, we monitor, we ensure that our borrowers do comply with the procurement rule and principles and policy that we have enacted, so to speak. Right. So, in fact, I would like to start by a basic principle. We ADB, and I think it's the same for other MDBs, probably the same for the World Bank or EBRD or African Development Bank, you name it, we are just funders. So we provide funding to our borrowers, and it's very clear this is perhaps the first tenet of our procurement policy, the responsibility for the implementation of the project, and therefore for procurement, award, and administration of contract, rest with our borrowers. So this means that we do not want to be involved in the actual, I would say, procurement. We do make a control and to make sure that procurement has been done complying with our policy and procurement regulations. And for the implementation, meaning the contract administration phase, it entirely rests on our borrowers. This means that we certainly are not going to bear judgment whether a variation is warranted, whether it's relevant. This totally rests with our borrowers and the engineers. However, as a financier, we do make we consider that procurement and the monitoring of procurement goes not only for the bidding phase and the contract award. We consider that our role should also involve a certain oversight during the implementation, but we do not want to take part in the implementation. So our action will be driven by what we call the core procurement principle, and we have actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 procurement values, which are procurement should be conducted with the sake of economy, making that the procurement should produce some, would say, economic outcome, the efficiency with regard to the procedure we're using, fairness to the bidders, so we make sure that our borrowers allow all bidders who want to participate to the bidding to actually participate, transparency. Of course, it should be based on quality. We want quality outcome and value for money. So this is the core procurement principle that we will use when we will conduct what we call our fiduciary oversight. And this includes the part which is not the actual bidding and award, but also implementation. So, beyond this principle, we also have this very important, I would say, angle. We also, of course, want to make sure that procurement and implementation, we have zero tolerance for corruption. So we have an integrity principle, very important. And the fourth principle, which were very important to us, is the fact that as per our charter, we have an eligibility policy, meaning that ADB has 68 country members, among which Vietnam, naturally. It means that any goods must have been produced, have their origin in one of our country members. So this is also one of the principles that we're going to observe when we conduct our fiduciary oversight on procurement and implementation. So four aspects guiding our, I would say, our action. As I said, our procurement policy, the four procurement values, zero tolerance for corruption, and the eligibility. Well, you may say what all has to do with variations. So I'm coming to it. First, I want to specify that we do not perceive variations as a nuisance. We even consider that without variation, probably no major contract can survive. And variation is something which is needed because, of course, there will be probably a number of facts, of events, which will require the employer or any engineer to consider variation, changing needs, perhaps design which turn out not to be fully, I would say, in line with the site condition. So variation are inevitable, and probably they are a very useful, I would say, aspect of the contract management. So ADB has totally open to consider variation from our borrowers. This is one. Second, as I said, since we consider that the responsibility for procurement and implementation rests on our borrowers, we do not want to be involved in the assessment of the technical relevance or even the need for variation. This is something which our borrowers and the engineer will decide. It's not ADB who will dictate that a variation should be implemented or not. But however, we do nonetheless ask our borrowers to submit all significant variations they want to undertake. I say significant, meaning that variation below 15%, usually, if there are no legal issues, it can be, I would say, instructed without even referring to ADB. But however, whenever there is a significant money-wise variation, we do ask our borrower to get our no objection. So you may say, why? Actually, there are four reasons for this. First, again, in line with the principle I described before, we must make sure that the variation does not infringe the principle of integrity. It may be, for instance, that the contractor who was awarded the contract would say was not sanctioned at the time of the contract award, but it may be that perhaps during the time when the contract was implemented, the contractor has become sanctioned by ADB for a breach of integrity. In that case, we are not going to ask our borrowers to terminate the contract. The contract will go on, but however, any variation then must be submitted to us, and we may object to fund a variation to a contractor which has become sanctioned. We also have some we have the term of debarred. We debar some contractor who misbehave, misrepresent, who indulge in bribery, misrepresentation. And we do debar such contractors, and we have also cross-debarment agreement with the World Bank, for instance. If the World Bank has sanctioned a contractor, automatically it will be sanctioned under ADB and vice versa. So first, we want to make sure that the contractor for which a variation is considered has not fallen into this sanction list. That's it rarely happens, but it may happen. We may also make sure that in another aspect of integrity, that perhaps the way how the variation has been priced, there is no perhaps overprice being paid. And sometimes, it's very common on certain work sites, but there is some arrangement between engineers and contractors, and I will instruct you a variation, and it will be fairly and fatly priced, and perhaps you can also think of me. So we must make sure that the variation is not I would say, was not used for some corruption. So this is the first angle through which we will assess variation which are submitted to us. The second aspect is also that the variation still will not infringe our eligibility principle. As I mentioned before, ADB fund should be used to finance projects and goods and works, the origin of which is within our 68 member countries. It may be that a variation, for instance, the other day, I have the case of a colleague who told me of a variation on a water treatment plant, and he said that the employer in the year wanted to install on the water treatment plant what is called a variable frequency driver, which is a device which apparently makes the pump function, I would say, better and increases life, I would say, expectancy. So this device, for instance, we want to make sure that this device will not be imported from a non-member country, from Brazil, from Russia, from whichever other non-member countries. So this is another angle for which we're going to assess the variation which our borrowers will submit to us. A third aspect or third angle, so to speak, is also one which is very much of concern for my colleague and myself from the procurement department in terms of VFM, value for money. A typical example of variation which is being proposed to us for road projects. Let's assume that we have two contracts funded by ADB, and one contract with one contractor for some reason is terminated. We have often seen the case where our borrowers say, well, we would like, in fact, for the remaining works under the contract which has come to termination, to make a variation for the other contractor. And the other contractor will take over the non-performed works. Well, but maybe you would say, for our borrower, would say an interesting or valuable, I would say, reason to make a variation instead of having the hassle of launching a new call for tender, a new bidding to award the remaining works. Why not entrust the remaining works to the first contractor as a variation? But in doing so, however, we're going to ask a number of questions. First, the contractor to whom you want to make a variation. First, how is he performing? Is he late? What is the quality of work? Because if you want to give him more work, if the contractor is already in delay, or perhaps if there are quality issues, perhaps that's not a good idea. We will also ask, what are the rates of this contractor? Perhaps it would be more beneficial to make a fresh tender. Perhaps the rates have gone down, and perhaps making a new fresh tender to get a new contractor on board for the remaining works, perhaps we'll get more value for money. We will also make sure that in terms of size, because making a variation somehow in terms of procurement, it's equivalent to what we call direct contracting. There is no competition. We just award the extra work to the contractor. So we want to make sure that this will not breach the principle of fairness, and perhaps there will be other contractors out on the market who would like to do these remaining works. So this is a kind of question we're going to raise vis-à-vis our borrower when they ask us our green lights or no objection to a variation. And the last but not least consideration is that if a borrower comes to us asking whether we would endorse a variation to an existing contract, then naturally there will be probably a cost impact. The variation, I would say, statistically speaking, I would say that 95 or 99% have a cost which is greater. There are some variations which are omission, but most variation has an impact on cost. Some variation and probably a lot of variation will have an impact on time as well, because probably it will impact the critical path. So as a borrower, as a lender, we want to make sure that the impact on cost and in time will fit with our loan amount and loan closing date. So this will be the various angles by which we will assess a variation. And again, we will not discuss the relevance of the variation or whether or not it's I would say a good idea or not, but we'll make sure that there is no risk of integrity breach. The variation will not give rise to procuring some additional goods from a non-member countries. Make sure that the value for money principle will be complied with. And of course, as I said lastly, that the variation in terms of cost and time will fit with the loan we're providing to a borrower or the grant. Well, folks, this is it. As I say, it's a very simple presentation, only 5 slides.